In this video, you're going to learn 5 of my favorite worship leading sayings, phrases, teachings that have changed the way that I lead worship. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. This is the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. So if you're interested in that, click subscribe down below. Also down in the description below, you'll find a link to a free PDF I put together called the Worship Rehearsal Blueprint. So if you are indeed a worship team leader and you want to lead your team well, the best way to do that is through worship rehearsals. And I've got a complete plan for you so that you can have the best worship rehearsal of your entire life. So check that out down in the description below. And let's get into it, because today we're talking about some of my favorite worship leading sayings. These are things that they're just short, pithy statements that have guided me over my 15 years now of worship leading. And so I want to share them with you, and hopefully they affect you in the same way. Before we get into them, though, I want to hear from you. What's your favorite worship leading saying? What's your favorite saying that has guided you in your worship leading? Let us know in the comments below. I'll talk to you in a second. Thanks so much for leaving your favorite worship leading saying down below. I want to share with you what mine are. Here they are. Number 1, this first one has to do with receiving criticism. And if you've served in worship ministry for any length of time, I'm sure that you have received criticism at some point. Either your songs were the wrong songs, or you didn't do enough hymns, or you didn't do enough contemporary songs, or the one button on your shirt was unbuttoned during worship. Whatever it is, people criticize and complain about things. So this is what we need to remember. This is the saying: don't wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty, but the pig enjoys it. Don't wrestle with a pig, because you'll both get dirty, but the pig will enjoy it. So when it comes to criticism, I find it best, oftentimes, to not respond. Because here's what's going to happen when you respond, and I'm talking about like unfounded criticism, where it's just somebody complaining. If they are, and this isn't like, we're not trying to be derogatory towards them, calling them a pig. It's just the phrase and the saying. But if you wrestle with a pig and you're wrestling in the mud, you're going to get out of that situation, that wrestling match, and you're going to be covered in mud, and you're going to hate it because we don't like to be dirty. But the pig in that instance, they like to wallow around in the mud. That's like how we know that they're a pig. That's like who pigs are. They wallow around in the mud, and whenever they get out of that and they finish the wrestling match, they're going to be like, man, I had the time of my life because I'm covered in mud. I was just rolling around in the mud. And the same is true when it comes to criticism, oftentimes, especially unfounded criticism. Some people just like to complain. Some people just like to roll around in the mud and get dirty. And that's just who they are. But that is never a good look for a worship leader, or really a leader in general, I think. And so I think of, I'll just bring it to YouTube, because that's where we're at right now. From time to time, I get rude comments on my videos. First of all, I don't care, because I don't know these people. Oftentimes, they don't even have a picture. Their name is like some random thing like Stinky Pickle 37, and they leave a really rude comment on my video, and I'm like, I don't know you. I'm sorry you feel that way. I don't even respond. Oftentimes, I'll just scroll right past it. And I think we can do the same thing when we receive criticism in our worship ministry, unless it's like affecting the people of our church. But sometimes, man, it's just good to let those things go, because if you engage in it, then you're just going to get dirty. And you don't want to get dirty, but the pig wants to get dirty because that's what the person who criticized you in the first place wants. They want you to wrestle in the mud. So don't give that to them. Back to the YouTube comments things too. Like, I don't respond to it. I've never seen somebody respond to a YouTube comment that was like negative and they respond in a snarky way. I've never seen that been a good look for a YouTuber. So if you are watching this and you are a YouTuber, please just hide their comment. You don't need to post about it. You're just encouraging them. You're just wrestling in the mud. Was this an excuse to just talk about that idea? No, it was not. I'm talking about worship ministry here. If you receive criticism, don't wrestle in the mud with the pig. Just let them wrestle around in the mud themselves, and then they'll get out of it, and everyone will see how dirty they are. So, when you receive criticism, don't wrestle with a pig because you'll both get dirty, but the pig will enjoy it. On to number 2. Number 2 has to do with resting. And man, anytime I make a video about resting on this channel, it bombs. Nobody likes to talk about resting and taking days off, but it is seriously like one of the most important things that you can do as a worship leader, because if you don't take a day off, then you're going to be tired and exhausted and you're going to burn out and not be able to serve as long. So here is the saying for that when it comes to rest, and this is from Kerry Newhoff. He says, if you don't take the Sabbath will take you. If you don't take the Sabbath will take you. And what that means is you can push and push and push in ministry. And many of us often do because there's always more to accomplish. And so we're like, well, I've got this, and this to do today, and so I can't take off today. And so you work even harder. And you can do that for a period of time. But eventually, you need a Sabbath rest because that's how God created us. And so if you don't take it, then it will take you. And it won't be a pleasant experience because you're going to be burnt out. And maybe someday you're going to wake up after you haven't taken a day off in a year, and you're going to be laying in bed unable to move because you are just exhausted. And that is the Sabbath taking you. So you don't want to experience that. And maybe you're even going to be frustrated enough that you're eventually going to stop serving in ministry because you're so overwhelmed by the constant work. So if you don't take the Sabbath will take you, and it will not be a pleasant experience. So I've used that over the years to remind myself that time off is important. It's important to have at least one day off a week. So pick that and commit to it, whether you have all of your work done that you need to get done or not. There's always more to do, but there's always next week to do it. So get done what you can get done in the allotted amount of time, and then don't forsake your day off. If you don't take the Sabbath will take you. Moving right along on to number 3. Number 3 has to do with prayer. And this is from Martin Luther. He said this one day. He said, I have so much to do today. Sound familiar? As a worship leader, we just talked about that. I have so much to do today. I think I should spend the first 3 hours in prayer. I have so much to do today. I think, he said shall because he was that kind of old-timey guy. I have so much to do today that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer. Now, do I think that you need to pray for 3 hours every day? Probably not. That's a long time unless you're praying like throughout the day. But Martin Luther was just talking about the importance of starting your day off with prayer and making a commitment to that no matter how much you have to do. And I struggled with that this morning because I've made a commitment to myself to sit down and pray in the morning. I literally, because I need this accountability for myself, I start a 15-minute timer and I pray or attempt to pray until that timer's hits zero. I think I've talked about that before on this channel. And so this morning, I was like, man, I want to come in to church and I want to film a bunch of videos. And I want to get it done before lunch today. So I need to get over there like right now. Like I woke up just a little bit later than I wanted to. And I was like, I could sacrifice prayer this morning. And maybe I'll just pray on my way over to church, which never actually happens because I get distracted on the car ride over. So I made the commitment to pray because I don't care how much I have to do during the day. If I don't pray first, if we don't pray first and set our minds on the right thing and surrender our will to God's will and seek wisdom and direction from Him, then there's no way we're going to be able to complete everything that we've needed to complete. On the opposite side, it's happened to me so many times before where I've felt overwhelmed in the morning with all that I've had to get done, but I still prayed and sought direction in those things that I needed to get done from God. And even though, and I'm only talking about sacrificing like 15 minutes here. Martin Luther was sacrificing 3 hours, but I'm sure the same thing happened for him. Even though I sacrificed that time, guess what? I still got all of those things done because I think God honors our time spent with Him. That's what He wants from us, right? He wants us to spend time with Him, seeking His will and His direction. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe the solution is to not do all of those things, but simply take 15 minutes, a half an hour. If you're like Martin Luther status, 3 hours to pray before you get to your to-do list and see how it improves the speed of you doing those things. Or maybe you recognize that things on your to-do list weren't as important as you thought they were, and so you don't end up doing them. I have so much to do today. I think I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer. Number 4 has to do with stage presence or modeling worship while you're leading worship. And this one comes from Brian Fuller. I think that's where I first heard it, over on Worship Tutorials. I'm sure you guys know who Worship Tutorials are here on YouTube. But I once heard Brian Fuller say this, and I've said it multiple times on my channel now, and that is, when it comes to stage presence or modeling worship, what you do on stage tells people what's appropriate for worship in your church. I'm pretty sure that's what he said, or I've misconstrued it over the years and changed it to fit what I wanted to say. But so don't quote me on that, Brian, but what you do on stage tells people what's appropriate for worship in your church. So think about that. What do you want to see from the people in your church when it comes to worship? Like how they worship. What do you want to see them doing whenever you look out on Sunday morning? And then think about, okay, am I modeling that on the stage? Because you set the bar of what worship will look like in your church. So if you are with your guitar and you're just staring down, looking at your music stand, plunking along, never looking up, never smiling, then you're probably going to see a lot of uninterested people in your church because they're looking to you to model worship. So if they've never worshiped before, if there's someone new who comes into your church, then they're going to look at you and be like, okay, that's what worship looks like. So I'll just stand here and stare at the screen, read the words, sing the songs. Inversely, if you're up there worshiping, however you want to worship, I think everybody worships in a different way. There are biblical ways that we're called to worship, but everybody has a different level of expression in worship, I suppose. So I'm not saying you have to be running around with your arms up in the air and kneeling and crying on stage and jumping around, but just know if that's what you expect worship to look like in your church and you aren't doing it, then it's never going to happen, because what you do on stage tells people what's appropriate for worship in your church. So this is something that I've even taught my worship team because I want them to model worship. So we dream about what we want worship to look like in our church. And then we say, okay, I'm not just going to put the blame on the people of our church. I want to set the tone for that, and I want to model that. So keep that in mind when it comes to modeling worship. Stage presence, what you do on stage will tell people what's appropriate for worship in your church. And number 5 has to do with leadership, because we are leaders, right? As worship leaders, we are de facto leaders. It's in our title. Also, many of us are also worship team leaders, so we're leading a worship team, so we are leaders. So I had to put a leadership quote in here, and this is one that has guided me over the years, and it's this: people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And this is something that I've had to struggle with because I'm an Enneagram 5. So I like information and only information. And I struggle in relationships with people and relating to them. But as a leader, I can know all of the right answers. I can have all of the knowledge in the world, but if I don't actually connect with the people that I'm leading and care about who they are, then they're not going to care that I know every answer. They're not going to care about my knowledge because they just want to know that I care about them. That's where it has to start. And maybe you struggle with the same thing. Maybe you sit on YouTube all the time and watch all of the videos on the Leading Worship Well YouTube channel, and you've gotten so much information when really you need to go and take somebody out for coffee on your worship team. Or you need to stop watching this video right now and send somebody a text and say, hey, I know you have this going on this week. How'd it go? Or how are you doing? Those are the things that I struggle with personally. I'd rather just sit on YouTube and watch a bunch of information and increase my worship leading knowledge. But if we want to be leaders in the church, we can't just be encyclopedias. We have to care about the people that we're leading. So remember that in your leadership. People won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. There they were, my 5 worship leading sayings that have guided me over these past 15 years of worship leading. I hope that one of those resonated with you and will guide you in your own worship leading. Hey, I put together, if you are a worship team leader, I put together something free for you. It's called the Worship Rehearsal Blueprint. In it, I walk you through a step-by-step plan of how to have the best worship rehearsal you've ever had, where you will lead your team, not just musically, but spiritually and relationally as well, so that you can help them grow in their faith, grow in their relationships with each other, and strengthen the unity of your team. So it's a complete plan for you. You can just implement it into your worship ministry right away. So check that out down in the description below. There's a link to it. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video. Keep leading worship well.